The gospel reading is Luke chapter 12, beginning with the 13th verse. Someone from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And Jesus said to him, "Man, who appointed me as judge or referee between you and your brother?" Then Jesus said to them, "Watch out, guard yourself against all kinds of greed. After all, one's life isn't determined by one's possessions, even when someone is very wealthy." Then he told them a parable. A certain rich man's land produced a bountiful crop. He said to himself, "What will I do? I have no place to store my harvest." Then he thought, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. That's where I'll store my grain and goods. I'll say to myself, you have stored up plenty of goods, enough for several years. Take it easy, eat, drink, and enjoy yourself." But God said to him, "Fool, tonight you will die. Now who will get the things you have prepared for yourself? This is the way it will be for those who hoard things for themselves and aren't rich towards God." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. For some of you, you might be aware, but for others, you might not be aware, that September 1st marked the first day for bishops in the North and the Southeast jurisdiction to take their new seats. And this morning, we are very blessed to welcome Bishop Paul Leland and his wonderful wife, Janet Leland. So thank you, too, for being here this morning, and we look forward to doing mission and ministry with you and to support you in any ways we can. Thank you. This passage, it reminded me of something that I love so much, and that is sports. Though there are some persons that are within sports that I personally didn't like or care so much for, and those are the referees and the umpires. I remember as an 8-year-old boy, we were playing a game of soccer. This is rec league. This was not travel league. This wasn't anything else except a dirt pasture, basically, in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And a kid obviously handballed, and I was the goalie. And he obviously handballed it, knocked it down, then kicked it in and passed me. Well, I wasn't pleased with this. So I informed the ref that I was not pleased with this, and I did not know 8-year-olds could be red carded from a game for lack of sportsmanship. Though I will say, if you want to watch 30 or 45 seconds of the greatest theater, debate competitions, tumbling, acrobatics, and public speaking, I do encourage you, if you don't already, to watch professional soccer. If you watch soccer, and I'm not taking light of those who truly do get kicked, because it does hurt, and you'll see them rolling around on the ground, but, there's some bit of theatrics to it. They'll grab their abdomen when, in fact, no one was near them to hit them there, or they'll grab their knee and start writhing in pain and rolling around and, getting all mad, and then the referee goes over to the other player who did it, and he starts yelling at him, and that player is like, "What are you talking about? I wasn't even near him." And then you see the referee do something like this. And the game is therefore marked. This player has this against him. It's not just in soccer. Just yesterday, I was falling back in love with college football, sitting and watching it and enjoying it all. And you would see players getting these fouls or these penalties, and some of them make sense, but for some, your team might have lost, and you might say, well, if it wasn't that offsides, or if it wasn't that encroachment, or if it wasn't that pass interference, we would be fine. We would have won the game. Never mind the other opportunities that you had to win the game early on. Basketball, we see it. The player says it was all ball, while the player's hand is swelling because he was slapped so hard. It's their job. The referee has to make that split decision to say, this team was right, or this player was wrong, and it is so hard It was so complicated. You know, they're not just out there just to referee right then. They have climbed through the ranks. They have put in their time. Some of them are really trying to get to the next level. So the more playoff games you get, I've learned all this, you can bump up to the NFL if you're a college referee. Same thing for the soccer refs in the Olympics. They had to have a good career to get there. They put in the hard work. And so what really strikes me this morning with our passage from Luke is when Jesus looks at this guy. We're going to call this guy Ben, by the way. So Ben is there in the crowd, and he shouts out, "Hey, Jesus!" The crowd's muddling around. "Jesus, tell my brother to split his inheritance with me." And I'm sure the crowd really got quiet at that point, and they're all looking around and say, "Well, what is Jesus going to say to this?" And he simply says, "Man, who appointed me to be the judge or your referee for you and your brother?" Man, who appointed me to referee between you and your brother? I can imagine Ben wasn't expecting that. I could imagine Ben was going to God, crying out to God, saying, "Give me what is mine, give me this, make sure my brother does that, make sure that I have what I am due, make sure that everything is split fair down the middle. You know, this is my life too that's being affected." Well, the good thing is I know that nobody in here this morning has ever gone to God asking for stuff like this, right? In fact, we probably all have. We probably all have said, "You know what, God, if this person would just leave me a little bit alone, I could be a better Christian. You know what, God, if I just had a better edge around this, I would be able to be a better disciple. You know what, God, be the referee between these situations of these hard decisions." Man, who appointed me to be referee between your material goods and your sister or brother? Don't you just love Jesus? Doesn't that just make you feel good this morning and feel comfortable? Makes you think a little bit more, right? Jesus makes it so relatable. Jesus answers with something that we all understand. Jesus answered with something that this man was able to understand. Who am I to set things up for your material worldly ways against you or your brother or your sister? We have obviously all been in this situation where we feel like we're being shortchanged by somebody and we want somebody to make that decision for us. We've all been in the situation where something might have been passed down to us and we're struggling to split it up. We're struggling to say, "Well, this is mine," and, "Well, no, this is yours," and, no, I need somebody to decide for me. And you get wrapped up into the material things. You get wrapped up into what I would say is a bit of greed. And a part of us, relates to Ben in this. His brother, for just namesake, we'll call him Bart. Ben wasn't getting the split that he was supposed to get. Mom and Dad probably left behind some cool things, maybe like 30 goats, a beautiful vineyard, some olive wood carvings, a nice 2-story, 2-donkey bungalow on the side of the mountain. It was all there. So we can't blame Ben for being pretty ticked that his brother wouldn't split it up with him. I mean, we would be upset, right? We would want that bungalow. And that's when we hear him crying out, "Split it up for us, Jesus. You take the initiative. You take the ownership. Not me. Not me who's been here, but you do it." We don't hear from Bart's perspective, do we? We don't get that privilege. Luke didn't take that down. We didn't know what he had planned for us half. We just know what Ben had planned. And Ben was hungry. Ben was eager. He wanted it all for himself. He wanted it right there in his lap. He wanted it right there in his own community. He wanted it right there so he could have it, so that he would be satisfied, so that it would be all to himself. Ben suffered from a little bit of the me, myselfs, and I's. Luke specifically notes that in this writing, And I love how he points it out as saying, I will have enough to eat by myself. I will have enough to drink by myself. I will have enough space for my goats by myself. I will have all these things to myself. Not once is it noted that he wants these goods and wants these things for the better of the community. Not once did he say to Jesus, hey, you know what? If you make my brother split it with me, I'm sure we're going to go and start feeding our neighbors who don't have anything. You know what, Jesus, if you make him split it with me, I will let them come and stay in the extra bedrooms of my house. Never once did we hear that. Jesus just says, look, I'm not going to referee with this. And then he follows it up with this wonderful word. Guard yourself against all kinds of greed. Guard yourself against all kinds of greed. It's very important for us to hear this morning. Greed and all stories associated with greed usually have the same common thread that goes throughout them, just as this parable. Ben wants more and more and more. Ben wants it all. He wants the shiny things. He wants that zero-turn goat mower. He wants it all that he can have right there in his possessions. And the common theme is when we want more and more and more to the me, myself, and I's, we get further and further and further away from the us and the we's and the communities. He wanted it to himself. He wants his neighbors to be impressed with just how large his house is. He wants his neighbors to be impressed with just how long his dining room table is. He wants his neighbors to be impressed with just how big his grain shelter is. He wasn't satisfied, if you caught that, with just the one he had already on the property. He wanted to tear it down, as the parable tells us, to build a bigger one. So they'll have all that he needs right there. He wants his neighbors to notice the new addition in the house that he's building. He wants them to notice the fancy clothes with the fancy trademarks. He wants them to look at his new fishing boats, not just 2 oars, but his 4 oars. The story of greed goes on and breeds and brews within Ben. He just wants more and more and more. And when we want more and more and more for ourselves, I can't help but think about how further and further and further we get away from the gospel's truth. About truly who we were created in the image of. You know, this morning we chimed beautifully the Holy Trinity. The Holy Trinity is God. It's the very essence of community. It wasn't just God just coming in and hanging out. No, God gave us Jesus, his Son, and the Holy Spirit that dwells within us. It's how we're supposed to live. It's the example of what life looks like. It's community. And if we get wrapped up like Ben was getting wrapped up with the greed and all the wants and all the desires, we get further and further and further away. And as we get further away, we lose contact with those who matter. We lose contact with those who have been pushed to the margins. We lose contact with those who have been ostracized. We lose contact with those who are truly hurting because we're so self-absorbed and so self-focused that we want to grow and grow our nest eggs rather than to say, hey, I noticed you need something out of my pantry. Hey, I noticed you need something out of my house. Hey, I noticed that you don't seem to have it all together. How can I walk and be with you and help you? When I think of greed, I think of it as the ultimate detriment to a community's well-being. Something that we all struggle with. Not just a financial thing. It's not talking about, saving all you can, building your 401k, your IRAs, and your CDs, everything that you can have so much. I'm not saying that God doesn't want to have things. I think that could be cliche and trite. What I'm saying is that we have to be better stewards of what we have been given. of what we have in our possessions, that we can go out into this world and bless others. It's okay to save. It's okay to prepare for your kids' college. It's okay for all these things to happen. But when we think about community and when we get away from the me, myself, and I's, for myself, for my family only, and for my room in the house, and for my car, and for all this, we have to stop ourselves when we get absorbed into that and say, who is my neighbor? Who is around me for me to care for? That it no longer becomes a me world, but it becomes a we world. Becomes something that we are a part of an us. When I think of greed, I think it's the ultimate detriment to a community's well-being. Greed and culture creates an ugly divide between the haves and the have-nots. It's the quickest thing that causes it as well. And it makes me think of this statement, the haves and the have-nots. So we think about the others, the ones that we push to the side just because, they don't really fit in our comfort bubble, right? They exist the way they do because we exist the way we do. A few weeks ago, I had the humble privilege to officiate somebody's funeral. And as I was getting to know this person more than I did, I kept on hearing the same stories come up from family members, from friends, from fraternity brothers, and all. And they said, what was so special about this guy is that he just took in homeless people. He would see them in the pouring down rains or the snow, or they would see them in the hot weather, and he said, why don't you come home with me? I've got space. This is a true story. One of the guys he took in was there at the funeral. He would take them in. And finally I got to his daughter and I said, wasn't he scared? Didn't he fear that something might happen? Didn't he fear that something might go wrong? She said, no. He wasn't scared. He had 3 or 4 extra bedrooms in his house. Why wouldn't he take somebody in? They exist as they do because we exist as we do. Where is it in our lives, in your life, that you might have that extra space? Where we might not live into this culture-driven desire for more and more and more and greed and greed and greed. For my space, for my things. But instead we're saying it's our things. That we step into the divine economy that God gave Christ to teach us about. That it's not just our table, but it's a table that's open for everyone. We practice that at our communion table. We need to practice that at our dinner table, and our kitchen table, and in our bedrooms where we might say, you know what, I could take somebody in. Because I guarantee you, when you start to get to know somebody's name, the game will change. You will see them as a beloved child of God, and you won't see them as a they or the other. You will see them as a sister and a brother. People needing to be welcomed in, to be felt part of the community once again. I mean, you go all across the city, we see it happening, don't we? Houses are being torn down to build bigger houses. Bigger houses are being torn down to build even bigger houses. New high-rises are going up. New construction all the time. And again, that's not a bad thing, but what are we doing with these extra spaces we are creating? And are we asking ourselves when we create them, what for? Is it for more space? Is it for more storage? Or is it more for the ability to become isolated in our own rooms where I can turn and be by myself, where I don't have to listen to the problems of even my own family because I want to just be by myself? What is it that we keep creating more and more and more? I think it's just the plague of our society of individualism and individualistic ways of living. And it all comes from greed. It all comes from greed. Greed is the antithesis to the way that we have been created. We are not created to be a greedy people. We are created to live bountiful, that we might give abundantly from what God has so given us. We don't give out of scarcity. We give out of abundance, or at least we should be. So when we think about when Jesus says, guard yourself against all kinds of greed, we have to really take that to heart. What are we being greedy of? Maybe it's finances. Maybe that's the reality of it. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's your time. Maybe it's your knowledge that you possess in your head. You heard Barbara say earlier this morning that we have all these wonderful small group studies coming along, and they're really good. Disciple Fast Track, Disciple. Studies about how to deal with grief, studies about how to become better servants, studies that we get to know ourselves better. And that's the cool thing about these studies. But if we're greedy with our knowledge and we're greedy with our time and with ourselves, we won't go to those classes. And I encourage you to find one to sign up for, because I guarantee it, the more you study and the more you give yourself in a faith way where you want to dive deeper in your spiritual development, you will then become less greedy with your time to serve others. We hear the opportunities to do a habitat build. Has anybody painted before? Has anybody hammered before? We hear this opportunity of going to Haiti. We have these opportunities to serve at Sedgefield. Don't be greedy if you can read. There's students we're working with at our elementary school that cannot read. What would it look like to go and serve there? Well, maybe you're good with math or finances. We have math tutoring at Sedgefield. Maybe you could go and serve there. Guard yourself against all kinds of greed. Let go of those things that are holding you back. Let go of those things that cause you to be fearful that, I can't really be sacrificial here because it'll hurt here. Let that go. Let it go. Let God take care of it. Let God care for you. Let God nurture you in those moments. You won't be greedy if you open yourself up to God saying, here I am, Lord. Use me as you have created me to be in community, that I don't suffer from the me, myself, and I, but I can step into the we and the us in the community. The choice is ours. The choice is yours. The choice is personal. The choice is for your family. How will you go and how will you leave these doors differently today? How will you choose and what will you choose to leave behind here? We all have pencils in our pews. We all have our bulletins. I encourage you to think about it. Maybe it's during the prayer. Maybe it's right now. Maybe you know exactly what that greedy thing is that you're holding on to. Maybe it's your time. Maybe it's your intellectual knowledge. Maybe it's your ability to work and translate for bilingual people. Maybe it's math. Whatever it might be, you know what it is that you're holding on to. I encourage you to write that down. That you will write it down as a commitment to let it go, that you might grow closer to God by freeing yourself of that. And when you free yourself of that, you will live more freely. You will live more intently. You will live more committed to giving back to God all that you are. The choice is yours, church. Will you look at Jesus to referee between you and your goods and your possessions? Or will you live here today looking to Jesus saying, where can I give and live differently this week?
Hey, thank you for watching, and we hope you got something out of that. If you have any feedback for us, any response that was helpful to you, we would love to hear that. Please let us know. And everything that we put out is free, and we want it to be that way, but if you're able and feel led to support the mission of our church or the cost of providing this online content, here's how to do so.